Hello, Johnny Gabar here. Well, I'm very excited. I am finally figuring out all the technology so I can record this class. This is intended as a class to help addiction professionals in the state of Oregon. Sometimes it's very expensive and very difficult to travel live somewhere to get high quality trainings. I'm going to be honest that I myself have taken some and I've seen a lot of online trainings that are very poor quality. This is not that. My passion is to help the addict who still suffers and the people that serve them. That's what the intention of this project is, what this class is, and you're going to hear so much more of that in a moment. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to run through my PowerPoint. You'll see me, I'll be a little box in the corner there. So here I am, and then I'm going to shrink to a little bit, and you'll see that. And then hopefully, as we go through, you're going to believe me that you need to have your manual in front of you. Make sure that's there. Need to have your manual in front of you because many of the PowerPoint material I have put into the manual for you. So instead of hurrying up and writing stuff down on different slides, it'll already be there for you. And then in addition to the manual, I've given you what I call a test or response document, so you can fill that out as you go. Now and then you might want to stop this video so you can either record your answer, or sometimes I will ask for you to stop and spend some time thinking about some stuff and writing some responses. Okay, so addictive disease and trauma, part one. There's going to be several parts to this thing. Living in ACE's shadow. ACEs refers to the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. Well, since the 1990s, when this material began to come out, we've learned a lot about the relationship between early childhood trauma, the effect it has on overall health over a lifespan, and the effect it has specifically regarding addictive disease. So the ethical imperative of addressing your own childhood trauma in order to help you potentially extend your lifespan and the lifespan of the clients you serve. So we're going to give you some basic information about what addiction is, about what trauma is, lean into that if we don't take care of this for ourselves as professionals in the field, what we do and don't do is transmitted to the people that we serve. Because childhood trauma among us, the providers, is so overrepresented compared to people in the general population, this is a huge issue. It's also related to the length of our careers, our ability to serve others, and we're contagious. And we get issues of countertransference. We'll talk more about that in a future video, but in what we will and will not respond to in the people that we serve. So I'm Johnny. I like Johnny. Last name, yeah, Gibber. It's actually Gabar. But if you ever talk to me, would you just please call me Johnny? That'd be beautiful. And I'll tell you about my degrees and certifications in a bit. So please have your manual in front of you. I have those important things written down for you. And then to keep your head in the ball game, and in order for you to get credit, you need to have this test response document in front of you. It's something that you would complete as we work through the course. Okay, so I am dedicated to helping addiction counseling professionals and the people they serve. To benefit from this class, one needs to make it personal. That will become apparent as I work through this. How do the issues presented apply to you? This isn't like an academic thing and that we're in our little sterile environment and we're learning a set of processes and protocols to help other folks. That's not what this is. This is about looking directly into the eye of the relationship between addiction and trauma, understanding the effects of trauma on individuals, then on individuals who are professionals, and then we'll see how that can contribute or get in the way of our work with clients because of what we do or don't do. And then ultimately, that becomes a very important issue of self-care and burnout prevention. So there is a manual that accompanies this class for you to work through, and a test response manual to complete and use as a means of creating an action plan to help you and the clients you serve. To greatly enhance your actual use of the presented concepts and tools, I require you get a partner and or supervisor to share your completed tests with and use them as empathy and accountability partners. Now, I think it would be best if you would actually, if possible, you would take this with someone who was taking it with you simultaneously. So you could talk it through as you went. You could question some of the ideas, apply some of the ideas, explore some of the ideas. So this isn't, and so why do I call it a test? It's not really a test because I give you all the answers. The responses will be uniquely yours. The test part will be making sure that you're frankly paying attention, and I'll give you things, tidbits that then you have to write down to make sure your head's in the ball game. I know in this very technologically multitasking world, people often turn stuff on and then they answer the phone and they do the other things. That ain't going to work for this class. Multitasking, it turns out, is very stressful for your brain. And for most people, it's a lie. It just doesn't work that way. You're either doing one thing or you're doing another thing. You may be able to quick switch back and forth fairly quickly, but it mainly erodes education, erodes compassion, erodes connection. And I really hope that you will give this class the focus that I have given it in preparing it. So this instrument is intended to help you focus on the issues presented and to provide space for you to consider this material from an in-depth and at times personal perspective. The way you get credit for this class as you work through all the videos, you complete all of the things I ask of you for the test and written responses, and then you email them to me. Please don't handwrite stuff. So for those of you, and this is mainly actually designed for people in the state of Oregon, for folks who are MACBO, that's the Mental Health and Addiction Certification Board of Oregon, certified, this course will work towards recertification. And it will work for anyone who has a CRM or one of the CADCs, that's Certified Addiction Counselor. CRM is Certified Recovery Mentor. And there are 3 different levels of CADCs, 1, 2, and 3. So, and then one of the things that will occur is that MACBO will require you have at least 6 hours of ethics as part of your recertification. This class will allow you to get that ethics requirement met, although it's a 20-hour class. So you get 20 hours of education and you'll be able to cover the ethics requirement. So I'm sitting in a place called the Laurel Lodge, very beautiful space I have here. It was created originally for my sister Laurel, who tragically got killed by a drunk driver. And part of my process of healing grief is I usually have to build something. And Laurel Lodge, many, many beautiful things have happened here. And many of them because of my wife, Jana Gabar. You're looking at a picture of Jana there. And she did many women's groups here, spiritual groups here. We have a sweat lodge here. We did many outside, of course, many sweat lodge ceremonies. Jana was a very healthy person. She ate well. She worked out. She did yoga. She meditated. She did really all the things that you pretty much want to do to live long. But one thing Jana couldn't do anything about is that she had a lot of childhood trauma. You're going to find this ACE score, which you get on a level from 1 to 10. She had a 7, which is very high. The ACE score, what it does to your life expectancy. Now, it, of course, is a correlation, so we can't say the truth for anybody, but in their huge study that I'll tell you about in a little while of over 17,000 people, in their study, if folks had an ACE score of 4 or higher, only 3% of those people live beyond the age of 65 in their study. Jana passed away when she was 62. And this was of her 4th type of cancer. So it's dedicated to both my sister Laurel and then to Jana. And oh my God, I'm alive. Not long ago, I was skiing. I was in denial. A lot of this presentation is about breaking through our denial. I wouldn't have told you I was in denial. That didn't even occur to me until I almost went over this cliff. Now, this cliff is actually steeper than this picture makes it look. There was no surviving going over this cliff. It's about 300 feet. If I went over it, I would have landed on the rocks. I didn't realize where I was until my skis were literally on the lip of the cliff. So why is that? Because I didn't have my glasses on. I do everything with my glasses on. I garden, I drive, I walk around my home, I walk the dog. I do everything with my glasses on except for ski. Well, I didn't recognize where I was. I didn't see the little signs hanging from the rope. I would ducked under a rope, which is not a good thing to do in skiing, but I thought I knew where I was and where I was going. I didn't. I didn't see the little thing, little round things that hang from the rope that says cliff. Oh my God. So I am really grateful that my guardian angels stopped me in time from going over that. And that since then, I bought a pair of goggles that allow me to wear my glasses. It's later than you think, I guess. Okay. I'm an old dog. I've been around this a long time. I am a person in long-term recovery since 1980. That's a long time. I'm very pleased by that, but it's not like I had a choice. My type of addiction was one that made it easy for me to recognize eventually that I was powerless over my addiction. So either continue the path that I was on that wasn't good, or go into the unknown, which was recovery. And that's been an active process for me that I've continued to grow and learn pretty much my entire recovery. I eventually completed my bachelor's degree and then my master's degree. I started working in the field when I probably too young, frankly, but I only had a couple years of recovery at that time. Still had some serious problems I hadn't worked through yet. You'll hear about those. But I did become a certified addiction counselor in 1984. In 1987, yeah, 1987, I became a full-time faculty member at Portland Community College Addiction Counseling Program, and I taught there for 34 years. Much of the time I was department chair there, and boy, I had hundreds and hundreds of students during that time, and I learned so much during that experience. Um, I also, since 1990, have served the Oregon Board of Medical Examiners indirectly by working with impaired physicians and these days, physicians' assistants. And so I've done that a long, long time. And again, I learned so much of working with that group of folks, which I still do to this day, run a group, have some individual appointments. During this time, I created many courses: Men in Addiction, Trauma and Addiction, Peer Mentor in Addiction, Motivational Interviewing in Addiction. I've been around long enough, for those of you who've been in the field a while, that the book hadn't even come out and I didn't know about it. And so I started teaching a course, and a student came to me and they said, "Hey, Johnny, I think I know what you're teaching." I go, "What's that?" They go, "Here." And they handed me the Motivational Interviewing book. Now, love the book, except it did not include loss of control, which you'll see me getting all excited about during the course. In fact, in the original text, it said loss of control was a myth. Well, Johnny didn't like that. I've done my own research, my own understanding, and I wrote about it quite a bit in the book called Unveiling the Addicted Heart that I wrote. You can have it for free. Go to johnnygabar.com. And what I do in that book is that I try and demonstrate that knowledge of loss of control is essential to helping people understand and figure out if they have addictive disease or not. If you don't get loss of control, I don't know what you're doing with your clients in terms of primary care. So anyway, so that's my contribution to try and fix that. Again, you can have it for free. All right, I want to take just a moment and play a tune to my ancestors. I think part of this course is about being willing to look backwards a bit and get some understanding of who we are. So this is a tune I was actually in the Black Forest looking for where my name came from, and I found a little church that was pretty close to it, the little village where my name apparently came from. And so I played a tune in that church. And even under that church were some bones. It was just weird, more of a European thing. Who knows? Those could have been some of my people. Don't have any proof of that, but geographically we were close. I don't know. Okay. Uh-oh. And by the way, get your test. Now you're going to start getting some things to write down in your test. We're in deep trouble. We are in deep trouble in Oregon. You all know that if you're in the addiction counseling world. But so here's some little data I pulled together. Here's an article that says Oregon has the worst drug addiction rate in the country. Now, since I wrote this, they just passed some legislation. Remember, we had ballot measure 110, which basically legalized drugs. And now they are changing that. It hasn't kicked in yet. So, in my opinion, it'll be interesting to see what that does. I think that's a good move. And it's going to put even more pressure on the treatment system. Why? Because now people will truly be faced with the choice of a misdemeanor that could have up to 6 months in jail and or treatment. We'll see. Drug overdoses have just been going up and up and up. So in 2019, 280 people died. Then they rose up by 2022, 956 died. 2023, even more people died, it looks like. So one of the real tragedies of this is the deaths and the peer mentors who are dealing with it. The least trained part of the addiction counseling world are peer mentors, and they're the ones who are on the streets. They're the ones most likely to be interacting with people who overdose, or in the next one, suicide. In my career, which has spanned a long time, I have 10 suicides of either my doctor clients or students. And I only count the ones that I directly interacted with people and that I was in relationship with during that time. 10. I've talked to peer mentors that are having 1, 2 a month. A month. So vicarious traumatization is something we talk about later in the course, but it's real. It is hard to be a frontline provider when there's lack of resources. There's not enough people to do the work. So the suicide rate in Oregon is 15th highest in the nation. And Oregon currently has the second highest untreated addiction rate in the country. The state also ranks last in the nation in providing addiction treatment access. This is an article that you might want to take a look at. Peer mentors are key to Oregon's Measure 110 success, but they are working in a broken system. This is what the article says. Too much work to do, not enough resources. The frontline people, the peer mentors, are really taking the much of the brunt. Because here's the fact. If you're an addiction counselor somewhere, that you're in a place and people come to you for services. Peer mentors don't always go out in the community, but they're much more likely to. They're much more likely to literally be getting their hands dirty and interacting with folks who are in acute crisis. So, a recent analysis from the Oregon Health and Science University showed that Oregon's addiction care system is half the size it should be to meet demand. So that's why I'm saying it is likely that hopefully money will follow this recriminalization of drug use. Hopefully there's going to be an increase in treatment, and that will mean even more strain put on a understaffed treatment industry. So how do I know of all that strain? Well, the need for qualified addiction counseling professionals is so great that MACBO has temporarily, and that's been going on in what's their second, third year now, has temporarily reduced the recovery requirement for individuals who identify as in recovery from 2 years to 1 year. We need to roll up our sleeves and take a deep dive into that, because there's some real issues with it. Now, by the way, why did MACBO do that? Because of employers saying, we need someone to hire, of getting pressure from the agencies trying to do the work. Here's a catch. The definition of recovery, and this is kind of nationwide now, but used by the Oregon Health Authority and by MACBO, no longer includes abstinence. This is the definition they use. Recovery from addictive disease, a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. I got to admit, I'm not sure what that means. So I tested it. I talked to some folks representing MACBO, and I said, so you're saying a person, I don't know, they could drink every weekend and still say they're in recovery. They could use drugs on occasion and still say they're in recovery. And the answer is yes. Now, by the way, I am not beating on the Oregon Health Authority or MACBO. This change happened because of the Justice Department. They said, and perhaps rightly so, they said you cannot discriminate against recovering people. You can have an abstinence rule, but it has to be for everyone in the agency, not just recovering people. It's frankly unclear to me. Some agencies will use this definition, and other agencies will say you do have to be abstinent in order to work there. So, what are we ending up with? A much less stable workforce that has much greater demands on it. And so why less stable? What those of us who've been around a while in the addiction counseling world know, it's not easy getting sober. It's not easy staying in recovery. The first year or two can be very chaotic, very demanding, very depressing. There can be all kinds of grief work that has to do. And we haven't even got to the trauma stuff yet. So what we're asking of people who are in very short-term recovery that may not even be abstinent is to do a job that really requires some stability, that really requires some cognitive functioning, ability to give empathy to others, that is really a stretch for a lot of people in early recovery. But let's say they are. Let's say they're fine. Let's say they're able to do the job. There's so much pressure. So those still left standing are often asked to take on extra shifts and tasks due to the lack of adequate staffing levels. This comes up in every training I do. People are burnt out and they're tired. And as we talk about it, they go, well, their boss calls and they say, hey, can you cover Saturday? They go, well, I got this or that. And the boss goes, well, we don't have anyone else to do it. That's a lot of pressure. People will report, they'll work with folks, and then they'll be so discouraged because there's not enough resources. Someone's ready for detox, no detox beds. Someone's, needing to take a day off for their own self-care. Well, they're still working with that person. So there's not enough resources for clients. There's not enough resources for providers. In addition to that, those folks in the addiction counseling world have demonstrated to me in course after course after course. I give you more details on this in a little while, but they have is a community. The providers have a very high load of childhood trauma. Not talking about CADCs for a moment, but talking about peer mentors. They're the least trained. In the state of Oregon, it takes a 40-hour class to become a peer mentor. They're right on the streets. They have the highest likelihood of dealing with suicides and overdoses in the people they serve, and they're the least equipped to deal with those losses. And finally, something we tend not to talk about much, most places. And again, I used to visit an awful lot of agencies. We had students all over the place. So this statement is based upon interaction, both with myself as a person working in a large number of agencies, and then being a practicum supervisor. So being able to interact with supervisors and many students, and then provide supervision for students at these agencies, is that the reality is that supervision in the addiction counseling world usually centers on paperwork and is rarely focused on issues of self-care and management of countertransference. We haven't really delved into that, but countertransference is when our own stuff is getting in the way of our relationship with our clients, when our issues are clouding our perception of our work with our clients. Who's going to be really prone to that? The earlier you are in recovery, the less you've identified and worked through some of these issues yourself, the more difficult it is to work with folks who have those same kind of issues. And then where do the helpers go for help? Often people aren't paid that much, or at least enough to get regular therapy for themselves or outside support groups for themselves. So it's a challenge in our field, and these things really add up to a very high burnout rate. Okay, so let's lean into now this. What does it mean to be in recovery from addictive disease? So I talked about that before, and I read that to you before, and it's pretty hard to measure. I mean, really what you have to do in Oregon, you got to say, hey, I'm in recovery, and get someone to sign a piece of paper. That's what you have to do. There are problems with that. Am I going to say it's right or wrong? I don't think that's the right perspective. The right perspective is to say, who's ready to do the work of an addiction counselor? What's it take to get ready? So I'm going to roll back to, and I wrote a bunch of stuff for you about this, to one of my mentors. Never met the woman, but I read her book, and so influenced me. And that Stephanie Brown wrote the book, Treating the Alcoholic and a Developmental Perspective, and the things that she had to say about that. It's so important that what I'm going to do is that I'm going to stop my presentation for a moment. I'm going to ask you to get your manual up for a moment. I'm going to hit pause on my button while you go do that. So hang on just a minute. Okay, so I hope you got your manual in front of you. I'm at the section of the manual that says the definition of recovery doesn't matter. And so that's why I want to make sure because we're going to talk about it and then in a minute, I'm going to stop it again so you can take a look and answer some of these questions. But so problem one, we already talked about. No, we haven't. I'm sorry. So problem one, well, so MacBo says you don't have to be abstinent, but some agencies say you do. So that's kind of interesting. And we don't really know. So MacBo would consider it an ethical violation if a person is not in alignment with the agency's requirements of the abstinence policy. So it's something that folks need to be aware of and be able to think through. Um, I did a brief survey, and what I found, some agencies require abstinence, some do not. And then it gets really interesting. Well, what's abstinence? Some people are using marijuana and they're saying that they're in recovery and they're abstinent. Some people still are smoking cigarettes. And I know that's even more controversial, but they don't consider that an issue. Is it an issue? So I don't have answers, but I got a lot of questions that I think people really need to take a look at. And that is, when is someone ready to move into a position to help others? 15 minutes after getting out of treatment? 15 weeks, 15 months? Are there particular things that should, the benchmarks that should occur with those folks? Should they be abstinent, emotionally stable, and cognitively able to serve as a helper? Stephanie Brown has quite a bit to say on that. I'm going to have you read that, but she would suggest that there's all kinds of developmental questions that need to be answered that may take the first year or two of recovery to be able to work through that. Where's a particular individual at? How do you assess that? What is the cost to clients and agencies they serve that serve them if the workforce is less stable and more prone to relapse? The issues are huge. I personally worked with one of my supervisors who ended up relapsing, who ended up in intakes, taking drugs from patients, using those drugs, eventually, after he lost his job, calling those patients on the phone and getting money for them and drugs, sometimes successfully. Hmm. Hmm. So rather than listen to me go on about that, one of my heroes, William White, did an interview with Dr. Stephanie Brown. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Brown's work, she's a researcher. She's just not an author. She studied this stuff in many clinics. She conducted research. She thought deeply about this stuff and collected evidence. So I'm going to ask you to now pause your video and read what Stephanie Brown had to say. And then there's some responses that I'm asking for you to put on there to record in the test response thing. So take however long you need, go do that, come back, start the video again. Okay? Fair deal? We'll be switching gears when you come back. So hopefully you've taken some time and you've thought about those things. I'm going to make some suggestions myself. These aren't the right answers, but this is my current thinking on those very questions. I figured I'm asking you to answer them. I need to look at them too. So this is part of that test. So number 9, if someone has not been able to accept their own powerlessness, are they in a position to help someone else embrace theirs? Well, that's kind of interesting to me, and it's kind of simple to me. And I get to my thinking on this through observing who gets and stays in recovery and who doesn't. So in working with the physicians that I have over the years, and they are forced to come back to me if they happen to relapse, if they get caught, etc., is that almost always those folks who use again and come back in the system, they used again because they thought they could. They thought it could work out for them. They thought this time it's going to be different. And so their use was based upon their belief that it could work out. They had not accepted their powerlessness. And what I see is that people who get comfortable, it takes a while, but who get comfortable in their recovery are people who recognize. I have one guy who says, I gave up my privilege to drink. I proved to myself that once I start drinking, all bets are off what's going to happen next. Well, if a person has addictive disease, and if they haven't got there, how can they help someone else who's struggling with that very issue? And my world and the world of people I work with, once you decide that the issue isn't everybody else, but it's you, and once you go there, everything changes. And it takes quite a while for your brain to rearrange. Is Stephanie Brown that you just read, that your brain has to rearrange over that new core belief. I am powerless over my addiction. If someone has not been able to accept that they need a power greater than themselves, can they help someone else make this step? So you could interpret this as a God thing. I don't. I interpret it as a vulnerability thing of being able to say, I need help. When Jana was dying, I had the privilege of being at home with her. She was in home hospice. And as a result of that, we were giving her, she was dying of pancreatic cancer that had infiltrated her liver. So she was shutting down very quickly. And that we were giving her liquid morphine and a tranquilizer in liquid form. I knew the moment that she died, I was in trouble. Here I have all these drugs around. What am I going to do? Am I going to kill myself? Am I going to use? So I knew, left to my own devices, I was in deep trouble. So I told the hospice worker, I told the family members, please consider me an immediate suicide and relapse risk as soon as she passes and make those drugs disappear. I needed a power greater than myself. I needed to be vulnerable and say, help me. That's what I mean by that. Could be God, but it could be other things too. A big part, number 11, if someone has not been able to create healthy connections in their life, is an antidote to unhealthy connections with their substances. Can they help someone else create these connections for themselves? A lot of people get into recovery and they're still alone. They're still so alone dealing with those issues and those phobias and those anxieties and figuring out how to do the most difficult thing for most recovering people. And that is connect with another human being, show them our vulnerabilities. Maybe we should go first. I was a mess. I was a mess in my early recovery. I literally could not say my own name. I had severe social phobia, severe anxiety. I had grief. I didn't know what it was. I had so much work to do that went way into my professional life, and I didn't even know it. I did so much work at the expense of clients. It's just the truth. My career started when I was about 2 years clean, and it wasn't enough. I had way too many issues to address, and it definitely, upon review, negatively impacted my relationships with my clients. So, does allowing recovering people who may or may not be abstinent with 1 year into the addiction counseling world increase the likelihood of more instability in the agencies and a ripple effect of stress throughout the system that can negatively impact the clients and their colleagues? I don't know how anyone can answer anything but absolutely. It's hard to get a new person on board, right? That's hard enough. That's stressful enough for managers. For colleagues to be working with someone who isn't doing well, who we can't really replace, and now they're taking sick time and all of that. I think it's pretty easy to see, if you think about it just a bit, that the more unstable the workforce, the more stress you have on the other folks who are still left standing. So I hope you think these through. And basically, the question becomes, are you at a healthy enough place to be a helper. Some people need to step back and say, no, I need to go do my own work first. Or I'm already in the field and whoops, this stuff came up or that stuff came up. And I really need to be addressing this. I really need to be getting help for myself to address this, whatever this issue is, this family of origin stuff that came up, this childhood trauma stuff came up, etc. Well, that was good for me. I hope it was good for you. I'm now going back to my PowerPoint. We are switching gears. And we are switching gears into some of the basics. To me, God, I wish they were to everybody else. I've had many a fights, and if you read my little book, you'll see with that of addiction and addictive disease and loss of control. We're not even supposed to call it addictive disease anymore. Substance use disorder. I think that's damaging, and this is why. Many people can have problems with substances that don't have addictive disease. Take, for example, the drunk driver. Most drunk drivers aren't alcoholic. They had a bad night. Maybe they were ignorant. They can learn and they never reoffend. To put them on the same continuum as people who have loss of control, I think is very dangerous. I'm very comfortable with the phrase addictive disease. I know. Yes, if you look at studies of emergency rooms and doctors' offices and whatever, that language does matter. That if people use the word addict, they're treated differently. I get it. But for me, I need to remember that I have addictive disease. I don't not drink theoretically. I don't not use cocaine theoretically. I tell you, I would totally drink if I could. But why don't I? I have addictive disease. It's not curable, at least that we know of now. I haven't seen it. So this is a definition I've used. It was given to me a long time ago, and I memorized it, and I have used it most of my career. It's a chronic, takes over the person inch by inch, day after day, year after year, incurable. Now, some people get stuck on this because they think not using is the same thing as cure. And they will actually have periods of abstinence to prove they don't have a problem. Now, a family member who did this for 10 years, every other January 1st, he would stop drinking, the other he would start drinking. He would, in his mind, use that not drinking as proof that he didn't have a problem. That's not what tells you. And that's kind of weird, really. Imagine if I said to you, hey, I've given up baby carrots. No, really. That was my New Year's resolution. I haven't eaten any baby carrots. Doesn't that suggest I have a pretty weird relationship with baby carrots? So people say, well, yeah, I'm fine. I haven't drank in 3 months. Why wouldn't you if you could? I don't get that. So I want to be clear. If addiction is curable, that means I should be able to go out, plan on having 2 beers, have 2 beers, go home, not an issue. And that plan should never be violated. That's what normal drinkers do. They decide to drink so much, they drink it, that's it, no big deal. This disease can get worse and worse and worse. Absolutely. It's not always progressive. So nicotine addiction is clearly a thing, but some people they'll smoke 2 packs of cigarettes or 1 pack of cigarettes or whatever, and they can do that for decades. But here's how you really tell. What's addictive disease? It's characterized by the loss of control over the consumption of mood-altering chemicals and behaviors. That's the critical juncture. Okay? It's not physical dependency. We'll talk about that in a moment. It's not doing stupid stuff when you're drunk. Anybody can do stupid stuff when you're drunk. It's not about how much, but it's really, what was your plan? Did you drink beyond the plan? And did you pay a price that you didn't want to pay? I have another video on this that I'm going to show you about loss of control and how people can decide if they have addictive disease or not. Let me finish this PowerPoint first, though. So loss of control. Using more than intended. I plan to have 2 beers, I have 8 beers. I plan to have 2 lines of cocaine, I used the whole amount that I had. I plan on gambling 20 bucks worth, I'm hitting the ATM for 200. It doesn't matter what the thing is, it's I plan to do this much, but I end up doing that much. Now here's the tricky part. That doesn't have to happen every time. If it happens at all, that's a very bad sign. Okay. So loss of control is unpredictable and inconsistent. The more advanced the addiction, the more likely loss of control will occur. There are some people who will give up all semblance of control and will experience loss of control every time they use. If that's happening, they're in the much later stages of addiction, and I don't know how longer they're going to be with us on this planet. So one thing that loss of control isn't, that's not what I meant to say. One thing that addictive disease isn't is physical dependency. This is a really important point. Physical dependency is its own thing. Okay? So physical dependency involves becoming tolerant to a given drug. So it takes more and more of the drug to have the same effect. Okay? Or to get the same amount of dopamine activity. Once the body adapts to that. So that's why some narcotic users, they have to build up to a certain tolerance, or if they took what they're taking after they've been using for 6 months, at the beginning, it would have killed them. And that's what happens to a lot of folks, is that they'll have periods of time of being abstinent, and then they'll use what they used to use, and they can overdose on that. And then in addition, of course, you have the huge problem with fentanyl, simply because it's in so many illegal drugs and people don't even know what they're taking. And that's just way beyond what their tolerance was. Once you develop tolerance and you're used to taking a particular drug on a regular schedule, and then you quit taking it, then your body will go, what the hell's happening? And will go through different signs and symptoms of withdrawal, depending upon what the drug is. In general, the signs and symptoms, or the withdrawal signs and symptoms, will be the opposite effect of the drug. So alcohol, primarily a sedative, withdrawal, overstimulation, to the point that it can cause seizures. Those can continue, get much worse, can cause delirium tremens. Those can kill folks. If you look at opiates, one of the factors that opiate can do, good painkillers. Well, if you're physically dependent on opiates and all of a sudden you quit, what do you have? Great pain sensitivity. So, et cetera. So that's the general rule of what withdrawal will look like. Now, a person can become physically dependent without being an addict. Take, for example, someone who's in hospice dying, someone who has some chronic condition. They need medication. Let's not take that medication. And this happens. People are afraid we're going to turn them into addicts because they're getting the medication they need to deal with that condition. So that's an overdiagnosis of addiction. No, they're physically dependent. They need more drugs, but that doesn't mean that they're an addict and experiencing loss of control. There's also an underdiagnosis, because some people will believe in order to have addiction, you have to be physically dependent. And we just know this isn't true. There are people that may only use once a month, 2 or 3 times a month, but they have loss of control when they do. But they'll go, well, I don't have the shakes in the morning. I don't have any kind of withdrawal, so I must not be an addict. It's a really important distinction. Addiction, or people with addictive disease, may or may not be physically dependent, and people who are physically dependent may or may not have addictive disease. Okay, so what I'm going to do is pause just for a moment, because I'm going to get my what is addiction video up for you. All right. So now from another place on the great little paradise where I get to live, I'm going to give you my little chat on, do you have addictive disease?
Hi, Johnny here, sitting in the quiet of my garden, one of my gardens, and coming from you with my peace shirt on. What I want to talk about today, it's just me and you, is do you suffer with addictive disease? This is a pretty simple thing to determine, and sometimes we have to get out of the way some things that addictive disease is not. So I wanted to just give you a real personal and quiet way to decide if addictive disease is part of who you are. So we've talked about before, and if you haven't seen that, it will be on another video, what addiction is. And in a nutshell, it's the chronic, incurable, often progressive disease characterized by the loss of control over the consumption of mood altering drugs and or behaviors. This video is more about, do you have it or not? Do you have that disease? So here's the first thing to be clear about. Addictive disease is not the same thing as being physically dependent. People who are physically dependent have been taking a drug on a regular basis, and their system will adjust to it, and it takes more of the drug to have the same effect. That process is called tolerance. If your body's got used to taking the drug and then all of a sudden you quit taking it, the body takes a little while to readjust to that the drug is no longer present. That is called withdrawal. People who do not have addictive disease can certainly develop tolerance and withdrawal. People who are in hospice, people who are suffering in hospitals, people who have chronic conditions, they simply need ongoing pain medication. Unfortunately, because folks have misunderstood that taking drugs and even being physically dependent on them, that this somehow equals addiction, people have not been given the medications that they need. So physical dependency is its own phenomenon. It by itself does not mean that a person has addictive disease. Often people have been overdiagnosed with addictive disease because they are physically dependent for the reasons I described. But then on the other hand, many people who do not have physical dependency are considered not having addictive disease because they don't have the physical dependency. So addictive disease is something that may or may not include physical dependency. Physical dependency may occur in people who are or who are not folks with addictive disease. So we need to take that physical dependency issue and set it aside when we're really looking at trying to figure out if the individual suffers with addictive disease. The other thing that we need to set aside is how much you drink, how much you use, how much you consume. There are people who say, I want to party, they go party, they get ripped, they may drink huge amounts of alcohol or large amounts of drugs. This by itself doesn't really tell us anything about if they have addictive disease or not. The most important criteria, in fact, the criteria to see if someone suffers with addictive disease or not, is loss of control. Now, let's be very precise here. I am not referring to intoxicated people doing crazy things. Anyone who gets drunk enough can do some pretty crazy things. I'm not talking about that. Loss of control is very specific. It refers to A, people using more than they intended. You got that? People using more than they intended. They meant to have 2 beers. Their plan was to have 2 beers, but they had 10 beers instead. So that's the real crux of the matter. The other part of loss of control is people, because they use more than they intend, they pay a negative consequence for that use that they didn't want to pay. So when we look at loss of control, we have to look at it in the context of a person's life. And to get to that context, we ask what's important. So with most folks, and the list is pretty short, really, of what's important to folks. So do we have family can be important, children can be important, other relationships can be important, our animal companions can be important, health, job, security, our safety, and certainly our freedom, and then our ability to decide for ourselves, our autonomy. All of these are basic human values. So this is what I mean, the loss of control that occurs within the context of someone's values allows us to see if they have addictive disease or not. So let's pick an easy one. Let's pick children. Let's say a person loves their kids. They intend to take good care of their children. Maybe on this particular night, their mother had their children for a period of time. They were supposed to pick up their kids at 9 p.m. They were going to go out, see a few friends, have a few drinks, come back, pick up their kids. That was their plan. That's what they told their mother. That's what they told their kids. That's what their plan was. But what happened is the 1 or 2 drinks they intended to have turned into several more. As a result of drinking more than they intended, they didn't actually return to pick up the kids till much, much later than 9 p.m. And then something that almost always happens, people feel badly about it. And they tell themselves, or maybe they tell their mother or their kids, but they have some form of, okay, I won't do this again. Learn my lesson. I swear this will never happen again. Some form of that. Unfortunately, because that is not the part of the brain involved that can keep that promise. Sometime in the future, they drink more than they intend, and they face a consequence with not being the parent they want to be for those kids. So it's that phenomena, that loss of control within the context of someone's life that allows them to see if they have addictive disease or not. Now, does one of these events necessarily make a person an addict? I doubt it. I don't know. But there's a pattern. And it really comes back down to the individual saying, am I 100% confident that I know when I'm going to start and stop my use of a mood altering drug or behavior? If it gets away from them 1 out of 10 times, that's not a good sign. Could be addictive disease. That's not a good sign. It's very interesting. Some people will use abstinence to prove they don't have a problem. And they think they're in control. And it's like, no, they're not drinking, they're not using. How you really tell is you drink, you use, and then you see what happens. If a person really thinks they have learned to control their use, then they need to drink. And if they're able to consistently 100% of the time say, I need to have 1 or 2 drinks, that's all I'm going to have. Okay, cool. They learned their lesson. But if people have addictive disease, that's not a lesson they can learn. Because what's happening in the brain, what happens once they prime that pump of addictive disease, it overrides that higher functioning parts of the brain that say, I only want to have a 1 to 2, but that's in another thing. But here's some real simple questions to ask yourself if you're wondering if you have addictive disease. 1, do you ever use more than you intend? If the answer is yes, can you think about or even write down some recent examples where you used more than you intended? 2, is your using more than intended ever made you face negative consequences for that use? And if possible, write down what were those consequences? What was the price that you paid that you didn't want to pay? 3, have you ever tried to control your use and ultimately end up using more than intended despite your intention or promise not to do so? In fact, have you ever made that promise that this will never happen again? And despite your efforts to control your use, it happened again. Have you lost things that were important to you as a result of your use? And if so, what did you lose? If you do use in the future, are you 100% confident in your ability to predict when you will start and stop your use? Do you believe that you have crossed the line into addiction? Or do you believe that you have the capacity to become a controlled user? If you continue to use, are you concerned it will cause you to lose things in your life that you do not want to lose? Those are the important questions to be able to ask yourself the big question. Do you believe you have addictive disease? Recovery begins by telling the truth that we need to recover. Abstinence is not recovery, and in fact may be used to prove one does not have addictive disease. If someone stops solely as a mean of avoiding some type of negative consequence, eventually that pressure will resolve and their need to remain abstinent will evaporate. So a fundamental issue, if a person is going to move into recovery, is the basic simple question, do they need to be in recovery? Do they suffer with addictive disease?
All right. So again, read my little book, but I have grown weary of so-called experts who have declared that addiction is not a disease. And in fact, they say we shouldn't even call it addiction. I am fully aware, I mentioned this earlier, that people who have the label of addict placed upon them can be treated poorly as a result in emergency rooms, doctors' offices, and many arenas where helpers congregate. Certainly, there is stigma associated with the label of addict. The inescapable reality is that people with addictive disease often present with dishonest and manipulative behaviors, and these behaviors can make helpers become cynical and judgmental towards the people they are supposed to serve. But the real issue is being able to have compassion and empathy for addicts who still suffer and do our best to offer them hope. So, the brain and addiction of this module, this is my summary. Addictive disease is a disorder of the brain that is primarily unconscious and automatic. Remembering the reptilian brain, this is a good model for it. Close your fist. That's that unconscious reptilian brain. That's fight or flight's in there. Reward pathway is in there. Cerebral cortex covers it. So that's this part here that the prefrontal cortex, values, future goals, etc. They live there. And that's really kind of a slow lumbering process compared to how lightning quick the reptilian brain is. It's not even close. Once you got it, there does not appear to be a cure for addictive disease. Refraining from using substances and behaviors that quickly stimulate the pleasure pathway appears to be required for long-term stable recovery. Once a person accepts they have addictive disease, they can embark on healing from the damage of addictive disease. Based on abstinence, their brain can begin to heal. So that brings us to the end of the first module. So I'd invite you to make sure you have filled out and have all the answers to the questions that you need on the test part and the response part. I hope that you have taken the time to read the Stephanie Brown material that I gave you. I also have asked you in the test to read the first 31 pages of my book. Again, it's free, Unveiling the Addicted Heart for the discussion of loss of control and a lot of issues related to that. And you'll see that as you read it. So cool. That's the end of module 1. The crowd goes wild. Yay, the deer. We got deer up here. The bear. We got bear up here. Bobcats. Yeah, I've even seen a cougar jump on a deer. Oh my God. That was terrifying and awesome all at the same time. Okay. That's it.